everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, I'm back to just talking to myself about creatures that may or may not exist. See, Rebecca, you don't always have to wait till the end of the episode to be referenced. Little inside joke there. I always liked inside jokes and hope to one day be a part of one for you Office fans out there. Anyway, this week, I am going to be talking about one of my favorite creatures. I hesitate to call it a cryptid because I don't think there's any real basis in reality for it in the natural world anyway. I mean, if it does exist, it sounds more like a supernatural sort of creature and not a cryptid, which is more of just an undiscovered natural animal that is supposed to be here. So again, if you think of Bigfoot as a cryptid, it's an undiscovered ape. It's a humanoid. It's not something that jumps through portals or is dropped off by alien UFOs or things like that. So Bigfoot can fit into that cryptid category. This one can. We're talking about the Goatman this week and some related cryptids that are kind of in that realm of the Goatman. And if you're new here, I'm going to reference some older episodes. So it's a good chance to kind of see if you're interested in Goatman, to go back to some of these old episodes that kind of scratch that same itch and get caught up on those. Just, I can't vouch for the quality. I do things a little better now than I did like 2 years ago, or even a couple of weeks ago. I like to think anyway. So this week's all about Goatman, and let's dive right in because this is a weird creature slash cryptid slash paranormal entity, if you will, and it's more in the realm of folklore or urban legend, and a lot of the stories didn't even pop up until like the 1970s. So it's kind of like the chupacabra, which kind of came out in the 1990s, where you have this creature that doesn't have much history behind it. So it sort of came out of nowhere and people started talking about it and it became popularized, and it just makes you wonder, where did the legend come from? Where did the stories come from? It's a weird one, and I'll get into that as I talk about it. And some of the related creatures, there's like goatmen that have more specific names, a few of which we've talked about previously. So let's jump into Goatman. So I'm going to start us off here, as I often do on Wikipedia, and they call this an urban legend, which I tend to agree with. But according to urban legend, Goatman is a creature resembling a goat-human hybrid, often credited with canine deaths and purported to take refuge in the woods of Prince George's County, Maryland, in the United States. So kind of a local legend to Maryland, and we'll get into some other places later where other Goatmen sort of creatures have been found. But it does, from the reports, it resembles a satyr, which you can kind of see here on my screen. It's kind of like the traditional image of a devil. So almost like the upper torso of a man, horned head, but the lower torso, legs, pelvis of a goat. So hence the Goatman. And he's kind of got like a hairy face that somewhat resembles a goat or with goat horns. So that's kind of what people say they see. So that's why I say this kind of leans more into supernatural territory rather than cryptid territory. So we'll get a little bit into the history here of how this kind of came to be. In May of 1971, University of Maryland student George Lizama completed an undergraduate folklore project on the Goatman that was later added to the Maryland Folk Life Archives. In Lizama's paper, the Goatman was said to be located on Tucker Road in Clinton, Maryland. Later the same year, reporter Karen Hosler discovered Lizama's project in the Maryland Folk Life Archives and reported on it in the Prince George's County News in October 1971, this time placing the Goatman near Fletchertown Road in Bowie, Maryland. Additionally, this report covered the theory that the Goatman's origins can be traced to the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, and we'll get into that. But a lot of these Goatman stories, it's more like this lover's lane creature, almost like a cautionary tale, something that parents would tell their daughters, like, don't go to the lover's lane with your boyfriend because the Goatman will come get you and attack you and scare you in your car and try to kill you. And we'll get into some of the more violent stuff in a bit here. But let me continue. While Goatman stories originated in the early 1970s, some of its legends are set in the late 1930s within Prince George's County, following the disappearances and or deaths of multiple dogs, which were later attributed to the creature. However, given the condition of the remains, the deaths may more likely have been the result of passing trains. Despite evidence to the contrary, stories of Goatman's existence continue to circulate, especially among local students. go by graffiti reading Goatman was here were not uncommon. I don't know what that means. Go by that might be a typo there. Graffiti reading Goatman was here were not uncommon, and law enforcement would habitually receive calls of reported sightings, albeit with a number being pranks. The creature was commonly claimed to have a human face, but with a body covered in hair. However, descriptions differed on whether Goatman greatly resembled a hairy humanoid or a human with the lower portion of a goat, similar to the fauns of Greek mythology. As well, Goatman was rumored to reside in a makeshift shelter in the wooded region of northeastern Prince George's County near the abandoned trailer parks. Occasionally, it was rumored that Goatman would venture out to kill any living thing, such as animals, humans, etc. So there is this overlap with hairy humanoids, Bigfoot. So some people have posited that people are just seeing Bigfoot, and that can account for the Goatman. And I've said on the show before, I really don't like explaining one unknown with another unknown. And that holds true here too. We don't know if Bigfoot exists. So to say they're seeing Bigfoot and that's where Goatman comes from, I don't know about that. It's a possibility. Or maybe just people are mistaking other things and seeing a Goatman instead of Bigfoot. The vast majority of people see Bigfoot, not Goatman. So there's not a ton of Goatman sightings, but they're out there. So yeah, the makeshift shelter in the woods, that sort of lends it that more of human origin, that maybe this is an escaped mental patient or psychotic person or homeless person or any of the other sort of explanations that we'll maybe talk about later, that people have said that this might be where the origins of the story come from. My younger brother Jeff used to tease that he lived in the shack in the woods and he was Goatman, and I did like a little Photoshop thing years ago where I made him into Goatman. Or is it a real photo? There are people online who will think that it is a real photo. I just draw a red circle around it and there's Goatman, and people will believe it. So there you go. And so to get into what we're going to be talking about tonight, some variations. According to some variations of the legend, Goatman is said to have once been a scientist, Dr. Stephen Fletcher, who worked in the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. In this version, an experiment on goats backfires, and the scientist mutates into a half-man, half-goat creature who begins aggressively attacking cars in the vicinity of Beltsville, Maryland. Another variation of the legend holds that Goatman himself was an old hermit who lived in the woods and often could be seen walking alone at night along Fletchertown Road. So you have some weirdness here. You have this Dr. Stephen Fletcher, Fletchertown Road. You can start seeing how the local legends and stories and folklore sort of gets intertwined and confused. And, it's almost like a game of telephone, that one person tells a story to another person and Fletchertown Road becomes Dr. Stephen Fletcher. And even that whole story just sounds like a sci-fi movie from the 70s, The Island of Dr. Moreau, or just these human animal hybrids. A science experiment gone wrong, The Fly, movies like that. So it does make you wonder where these stories come from. But again, attacking cars, why would this creature attack cars? A lot of these stories would happen in lovers' lanes. So was this just someone's angry dad coming out and trying to protect his daughter? Very possibly. Was it an escaped mental patient or a hermit? Was this just a person who kind of looked bedraggled and in the dark? And, these kids, these teenagers are hearing stories about Goatman and say, oh, yeah, we saw Goatman. And the parents just perpetuate the cautionary tale of don't go into the lover's lane. So who knows? So let me continue this and then we'll move on. According to University of Maryland folklorist Barry Pearson, the Goatman legend began long, long ago. Long, long, long ago. Sorry, there's 3 longs there. Very long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, and were further popularized in 1971 when the death of a dog was blamed on Goatman by local residents. Pearson relates that bored teenagers keep the Goatman legend alive by repeating the story and suggesting that the creature attacks couples frequenting the local lovers' lanes, subsequently stirring interest in sites like Fletchertown Road. So there you go. There's that main explanation. And again, a lot of the reports that I read growing up, what would often happen in these lovers' lanes or these dark, deserted roads. So are these misidentifications? These are people who are local. They hear these stories about the local legend, and in the darkness, maybe they just think they've seen Goatman. So we're going to switch gears now, and I'm going to talk about Goatman and also some some variants, more localized versions of Goatman that have their own names. And we've talked about a few of these on the show before, but we'll delve a little bit more deeply this week. All right, so now I'm going to move over to Cryptid Wiki, which is a good source of all things cryptids and weird creatures. And I'm going to read from this a little bit. So we'll do some of the basics on Goatman. And again, we're going to get into some more violent stuff. So younger people out there listening, maybe turn it off now. So I'll read this. The Goatman is a humanoid cryptid most commonly associated with Louisiana, Maryland, and Texas. It is described as a 7-foot-tall hybrid creature, part man and part goat. Some claim it is a relative of the New Orleans evil chupacabra-like cryptid, the Grunge. I'll have to talk about that in another episode. The urban legends often tell of it killing young couples in parked cars or scouring neighborhoods killing family pets. There are also tales of it breaking into people's houses and assaulting its victims. And many attest from the areas that he haunts, it does not matter if you're a man or woman, he will overtake you and assault you nonetheless. When scared teenagers whisper about the Goatman, not all agree on the form he takes. Some say he was a man who kept goats and went mad after teenagers killed his flock, driven to seek revenge against any youngsters. But perhaps the most titillating version traces the origin of the Goatman to the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, a sprawling USDA facility anchored by a big brick building appointed with white columns. In this version, a mad scientist is conducting experiments on a goat when something goes horribly wrong, turning him into a half-man, half-goat beast that is naturally hungry for blood. So I have not really heard many stories about the Goatman breaking into people's homes. I have not heard of the killing or of the raping, and I use that word just because the article uses it. I know YouTube will often censor words like this, so I got to be careful not to mention it too often, so I'll just say assault. So I will continue here. He may not be as famous as his cryptid cousins Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, but Goatman has a devoted following. So again, Dr. Barry Pearson, the stories began surfacing a long time ago. The earliest sightings date back to 520 BCE, which is before current era, as the satyrs of Greek mythology who held an almost identical role despite 3,000 years having passed. So again, I think we have to be careful here separating cultural art, religious art from, 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago versus what people are seeing today. Or did they actually see these things, or was this art? Was this, how do you describe the devil? You paint it, and people would paint these satyrs, and it was this half man, half beast, and that was the sort of physical, visual representation of Satan. So, or devils, or demons. So to say that people were actually seeing them back then, I think that's a bit of a stretch, but that's just my opinion. So let's move on to some of the local variants. Okay, so this first variant, the Waterford Sheepman, I had covered this in episode 95, Race Down Ray and Other Pennsylvania Cryptids, because it's local to Pennsylvania. And it is kind of, as the name implies, Sheepman. So not quite a Goatman, more of a sheep, or like a sheep squatch, which is another creature that people will talk about. So let me talk a little bit more about the Waterford Sheepman. But if you want to know more about this creature and other Pennsylvania cryptids, you can check out episode 95. I will link to it in the description below. The Waterford Sheepman is an abominable creature that terrorized the small rural town of Waterford, Pennsylvania in the early 1970s. It lurked in farm fields, stalking the unwitting animals in a desire to tear it apart and feed on its flesh and blood. Hundreds of people witnessed this creature. It's also referred to as the Goatman, so it's kind of related. And I'm sorry, there's a few like typos and grammatical things in Cryptid Wiki, unfortunately, that make it through. And again, it's a great resource, but some of the entries need some editing and proofreading. Marilyn, I don't know who this is. Marilyn knew of the Goatman legend as a teenager in the 70s, but along with the stories, she had also seen it with her own eyes on more than one occasion. She says, I lived on Baghdad Road and I saw this figure running across the dirt road at one point near the old sawmill. She remembers that at the time there was much talk about the legend, with many people catching a glimpse of the creature darting across the road or into the brush along farm fields. She had a second encounter with the monster when she was 17. She says, He was there that night. One night I drove home, and right before I turned into my driveway, there he was running across the road and into the woods. So, not a lot of detail, but again, it just begs the question if these are local legends. I mean, she was obviously young, she was a teenager. These stories are probably perpetuated by the adults in town and the parents and other teenagers. You just are going to hear these stories, and then you see something that you don't immediately recognize, or it's dark, and you're already scared because it's dark, and you hear stories about the goat man, and your brain can kind of fill in the blank. So maybe you're seeing a bear, maybe you're seeing a person, maybe you're seeing another animal, or just a shadow. And your brain fills in like, oh my God, it was the goat man. Because you're already thinking, like, oh, it's dark. I'm coming home. It's dark. It's nighttime. I'm pulling into my driveway and I see this weird thing. Oh my God, is Goatman going to get me? And then you see it, and oh my God, it's Goatman. So you got to be careful about. I often call it Bigfoot on the brain, but it really is, as Qui-Gon Jinn said, your focus determines your reality. Like if you are focused on seeing a ghost, every little thing you hear is going to be a ghost. If you're focused on UFOs, every weird light in the sky is a UFO. Same thing with Bigfoot, same thing with any of these creatures. If you're constantly thinking about it, if it's on your mind, if you're already anticipating it, then anything kind of unknown or uh, unidentifiable can fit into that category, and you're going to see it. That's just psychology 101. So let us move on. So I'm not going to talk about the Maryland Goatman. We kind of covered that from the Wikipedia article, and this article doesn't really talk too much about it. We can go back into that, and I'm not getting too in depth with these. I'm just trying to do an overview today. But that's the Maryland Goatman. We've talked about that one. Was it a doctor who was experimenting on goats? Was it a hermit living in the woods? Who knows? So let us move on to the next creature. So this one sounds like a Catholic's worst nightmare. It's called the Pope Lick Monster. Unfortunate name. The Pope Lick Monster is a legendary part man, part goat, or sometimes part sheep creature reported to live beneath a Norfolk Southern Railroad trestle over Floyd's Fork Creek in the Fisherville area near Louisville, Kentucky. So there's a picture of what the Goatman, the Pope Lick Monster, is supposed to look like. So the urban legend says, in most accounts, the Pope Lick Monster, named after the Pope Lick Creek below the Pope Lick train trestle. So that is where it gets its name. It's unfortunate, but there it is. It appears as a human-goat hybrid with the grotesquely deformed body of a man. It has powerful fur-covered goat legs, an alabaster-skinned face with an aquiline nose and wide-set eyes. Short, sharp horns protrude from the forehead, nestled in long, greasy hair that matches the color of the fur on the legs. Numerous urban legends exist about the creature's origins and the methods it employs to claim its victims. According to some accounts, the creature uses either hypnosis or voice mimicry to lure trespassers to the trestle to meet their death before an oncoming train. Other stories claim the monster jumps down from the trestle onto the roofs of cars passing beneath it, yet other legends tell that it attacks its victims with a blood-stained axe. It has also been said that the very sight of the creature is so unsettling that those who see it while walking across the high trestle are often driven to leap off. So it's again, a legend about this creepy train trestle and the tunnels, and you can kind of see how teenagers would make this up. I mean, they're going to go to places to drink, to smoke marijuana, to have sex, and spooky legends are going to crop up. I mean, it happens around cemeteries and graveyards. It happens near tunnels, and this just sounds like another one of those. Other legends explain the creature's origins, including that it is a human-goat hybrid and that it was a circus freak who vowed revenge after being mistreated. In one version, the creature escaped after a train derailed on the trestle, which actually links the Pope Lick Monster to the legend of the ghost train, which has also been sighted on the trestle. Another version claims that the monster is really the twisted reincarnation of a farmer who sacrificed goats in exchange for satanic powers. So, once again, you have all these competing, those similar stories of where these creatures come from. Nobody ever really knows. So that always kind of bothers me because there's no real one story. It just seems to be the retelling of various stories that get intertwined and separate, but they overlap. So just very weird. The Pope Lick Monster, having no actual reported sightings, most likely exists only in the realm of myth and legend, of course. The infamous Pope Lick train trestle has become a favorite spot for kids, especially ones conducting lighthearted bravery tests, daring someone to climb the trestle. This has not always been fun and games, however. In the summer of 1987, a young boy fell to his death from the trestle after evading an oncoming train, and his fate was met again by a young boy 13 years later. On April 23rd, 2016, a 26-year-old tourist, Roquel Bain from Ohio, died after being hit by a train while searching for the monster. Her boyfriend survived by hanging onto the side of the trestle. And of course, there's going to be people who tell you this was actually the Popelick monster and they were lured there, and no one's ever captured a photo of it because just to see the creature will kill you. And I don't believe all that because it's just conspiracy theory, and it all just is nicely self-contained and self-explanatory, and it just explains itself, and you can't really poke holes in it because, oh well, if you see the monster, you die. And clearly these kids who are on the bridge who died because of the Popelick monster, and there are people who are going to believe that. I don't. I mean, again, Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is the most likely one. These are kids who tripped and fell or got caught on a railroad spike or a splinter of wood or any number of things and tragically died. So, you can believe in its existence, but I don't think these deaths are attributed to the Popelick monster. Okay, so this next variant we talked about way back on episode 12 of this show, Cat Squatch and the Proctor Valley Monster. And we didn't really delve too much into the Proctor Valley Monster, but we did touch on it a little bit. So I just want to talk about it a little bit more today. And this one is from the West Coast. So the Proctor Valley Monster is said to be a Bigfoot-type entity or a bovine-like creature that roams around Proctor Valley Road near San Diego, California. The road itself is well known for a plethora of paranormal and strange activity. So I think there's like UFO sightings and other stuff like that out there. One story from the road's history is of a teenage couple who go parking in the woods off Proctor Valley Road in the southeast corner of San Diego County in California. The car won't restart, or maybe they had a flat tire, and the boy gets out to investigate, but he doesn't come back. So again, we're hearing this kind of differing but similar stories. Nobody ever quite has the right story. Did he get out of the car because they had a flat tire? Did the car not start? Who knows? The girl stays inside, terrified because she hears scratching on the outside of the car. So again, you have the couple, the young couple, at night or in a car. The girl stays inside, terrified because she hears scratching on the outside of the car. Police find her the next day, still hiding in the car. The boyfriend, he's dead, torn and bloody, dangling from a tree, while his hands brush the car, producing scratching noises. And that's a trope we hear in a lot of these ghost stories. The hook, scratching on the car and it gets stuck in the door handle, or other things scratching on a car. We hear that in a lot of different ghost stories. The story sometimes has mysterious, huge footprints found nearby. The legend of the Proctor Valley Monster grew, and it is described as a 7-foot hairy humanoid like a Bigfoot, or sometimes a cow-like animal with its body parts in the wrong place. The Proctor Valley Monster is assumed to be responsible for livestock mutilation that occurs every now and then. The Bonita Museum in Chula Vista has a casting of a strange footprint alleged to be that of the monster. So this is almost like a cow squatch, very weird bull squatch. The picture they have here looks like something out of like a Dungeons and Dragons type game, God of War type game. Just like a mythological creature, a minotaur, something like that. So again, doesn't seem so really based in reality, but what can you do? So Roger the Inquirer from the internet asks, for years I've heard stories of the Proctor Valley Monster. Proctor Valley is northeast of Otay Lakes. Some say it's a deranged cow and others say it's San Diego's version of Bigfoot. Can you shed some light on this truth or legend? So again, I personally tend to think these are possible Bigfoot sightings. Now, that's not saying that Bigfoot exists, but if people are seeing things that they believe to be Bigfoot, some people may be seeing additional details on whatever it is they think is Bigfoot, whether it's really Bigfoot or a bear. I hate that, but whatever misidentification you want to believe in. So could that explain it? Are people just seeing horns on these things, or dog ears, or a dog snout? And that's where you get Dogman, Goatman, Sheep Squatch, Bat Squatch. I mean, there's all sorts of variations on these things. So who knows? So let's look into this. La Jolla has its Munchkins, Old Town has its ghosts, and East County has its Proctor Valley Monster. The old PVM seems to be a textbook urban legend or rural legend in this case. It has all the classic symptoms: teenagers, lover's lane, mysterious deaths, and the clincher. I never saw him, but my neighbor's babysitter's sister saw him. So, yeah, as I said earlier, you kind of have this word of mouth, this game of telephone, people telling stories, and it gets kind of twisted. So, again, this is more in the realm of folklore, urban legend, rather than cryptozoology. Proctor Valley monster stories go back to at least the 60s, probably earlier. One version involves two teens who get a flat tire while driving through Proctor Valley late at night. The guy pulls to the side of the road under a tree, gets out to look at the damage. His girlfriend locks the doors, and the next thing she hears is a scraping on the roof of the car. When cops rescue her in the morning, she learns that the scraping sound was her date's fingernails. He's hanging by his own feet from a tree branch with big animal-like footprints around the car, a thinly disguised version of the time-honored hook on the door handle story, as I mentioned earlier. And I honestly hadn't read that far in this article when I mentioned that yet. What the Proctor Valley Monster looks like is a matter of debate. One person claims to have seen a huge flying beast of some sort. In the 1970s, a local radio DJ organized a nighttime monster hunt. He gathered thousands of teens in the area. Why teens? And later reported that they had seen something like an oddly built bovine. Ensuing publicity is probably responsible for the persistence of the disarranged cow story. And that's probably why he invited teens, because teens are going to go out there. They're typically jumpy and naive and gullible, easily swayed. So you bring a bunch of teens out into the woods at night, telling them that we're looking for a monster. Guess what they're going to see? They're going to see monsters. A psychiatrist who once lived in Alpine claimed to have seen a Bigfoot type creature in the hills near his house. The doctor has shied from publicity, saying he wants to write his own book on the events, but third-hand accounts say he described a 6 or 7 foot tall, hairy creature accompanied by two similar critters. He made a plaster cast of a footprint 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. He also related many strange happenings and sounds around his home. Park rangers and other investigators could never confirm the sightings, but plenty of campers, area residents, and even a sheriff's deputy claimed to have seen some large, hairy thing tromping the hills of Alpine. One Bigfoot investigator notes that the nearby Viejas Indians have a legend of a similar creature that guards their burial grounds. So, again, it sounds a lot like Bigfoot. I don't know why a cow-like creature would also have human-like feet. I mean, it's just very, very strange. And these all just seem to be mix and match stories, different creatures, and different legends. And like I said, a lot of these involve teenagers, lovers' lanes, nighttime, being in cars. All the stories kind of intersect and overlap, and some diverge because sometimes it's a sheep, it's a goat, it's a cow, it's some sort of horned animal. In Michigan, you have Dogman with, the ears and the snout. So all these different man beast creatures. I don't think lycanthropy is a real thing. I don't think shape shifting is a real thing. It might be supernatural. I don't know. I tend not to put much stock in it. But if you go back and watch last week's episode, we talk about werewolves and our favorite werewolf movies and how that sort of shows the duality of man and the beast within us, the animal within us. How civilized are we really when push comes to shove? So interesting things to think about. And you have all these creatures who are half man, half beast, and they're, scary, aggressive, even though you don't think of a goat as something being scary, but you have this goat man who's jumping on the hoods of cars and pounding on the hoods of cars and scaring these teenagers. And I've heard stories too where it like breathes fire or it's got fiery red eyes, and just horrific stories that just don't really seem to fit into the natural world. It's definitely sounds more supernatural. So I don't know what to make of that. All right, everybody. So I'm going to cut it short there for this week. This is a shorter episode. Last week we did like a supersized episode. My buddy John was on, and we talked about werewolves and our favorite werewolf movies. Really good episode. Check that out. We ran long. We didn't get to cover nearly as much as we wanted, but we did talk a little bit about this sort of duality of man, the dichotomy of animal and man and beast, and how civilized are we really when push comes to shove. John had mentioned like we're 3 meals away from, anarchy. If we don't eat, if we can't survive, we start turning on each other, we start rioting, we start looting, we start, we need to survive. So maybe not 3 meals, but depending on the person, depending on the society, we are not very far from our animal selves. So I think a lot of these urban legends that we talked about tonight are just based in that. I think there's also a lot of just parental cautionary tales. Don't go to the lover's lane. Don't park your car in a dark place at night. Teenagers think they're immortal. They think nothing can hurt them. They think they know everything. So if you say, hey, if you go park in this lover's lane, your boyfriend might hurt you. No, no, my boyfriend would never hurt me. He loves me. No. Or just being afraid of other people. I mean, they were just creeps. We had Son of Sam here in New York City back in the 70s, 77, 76. And he preyed on couples kind of in lovers' lanes, couples that were parked at night and making out. And he, fires some shots into the car, killing people. But teenagers don't really frighten that easily when it comes to normal, natural things. You tell them their boyfriend's going to hurt them. You tell them some weird guy can come find you and hurt you. They don't believe in that. But you say that there's this Goatman and he's got an axe and he breathes fire and he's going to pounce on the hood of your car. That's a little bit more terrifying. That's a little bit more when you're out in the woods. It's hard to imagine a person coming out and hurting you. It's far more easy to believe that this legendary Goatman or Sheep Squatch or Sheepman or Proctor Valley Monster is going to come out and scratch up your car and bang on the windshield and try to get you and try to assault you. Much scarier for a teenager to believe that. They're not going to believe their boyfriend's going to hurt them. They're not going to believe that other people there are going to hurt them. But you tell them Goatman's coming, that's scary. And it's scarier than Bigfoot. People think of Bigfoot, they think about typically this shy monkey, that's going to see you and walk away or run away and not going to do anything to you. But you tell stories of a Goatman that's going to lure you to your death on the train tracks. They all just seem very cautionary. Don't walk on the train tracks, not because a train's going to hit you, but because there's this monster that's going to get you. So that's my theory. That's where I'm at. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Do you believe in Goatman? What do you think Goatman is? Where do you think the stories came from? Do you have a local legend that you want to share? I mean, there's so many of them out there, and I know a lot of them, but there's so many that I don't know. And they're not in books. They're not online. And that's what makes them great. So if you know a local legend that you would like to share, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com, and I will get back to you. You can come on the show. You can just tell me about the legend, and I'll talk about it like this to myself and to everybody listening. But love those like really hard to find, odd and untold local legends. I'd love to share them here on the show. But question everything, everybody. As I always say, question everything. Like I question these legends. Doesn't mean you can't believe in them a little bit, because I kind of do. That's part of the fun, though, isn't it? But question them. Question, is this a hermit? Is this a cautionary tale? Is this just a game of telephone that people see things and perpetuate the myth? Are people just seeing Bigfoot? We have to accept that Bigfoot exists in order to accept that they're misidentifying Bigfoot, but that's a topic for another show. So yeah, question everything, everybody, and until next time, rock and roll.